Alright, so for my inquiry project, I decided to do it over world language anxiety and the reasons it happens, and also kind of the remedies and ways we can look at it to make a change within not only ENL students, but also students who grew up speaking English that are trying to learn a second language as well. So, the first thing I'm going to look at are my questions and connections to DEI. So my questions that I had when I started the project were basically, what can be done to lessen world language anxiety for both ENL students and native English speakers learning a second language? And what factors lead to this anxiety, and what can be done by a teacher to lessen the effects? And then this relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion because it tries to make education all in all just more inclusive for the ENL students. And the end goal is really just to make their lives more equitable in as many aspects as possible. And also, supporting students in learning a second language supports their awareness of diversity. So this connects to DEI on all levels. So basically I have a little video, that we can watch that basically like reinforces the concept of what it's like to be an ENL student. And it basically just demonstrates, a lot of the struggles that they have in an everyday classroom. And you'll kind of notice there's key moments in this where the teacher could have intervened and been really crucial for the student, or also moments where the student, Moses, feels like socially outcasted or like his confidence is affected by how the classroom runs. So without sound here, we can kind of watch part of this video. Basically, the teacher is telling them that they're going to be taking quite a few tests this week, and all that he hears are a few of the words that she says. So he basically just picks out that there's a test, there's a test, there's a test, but he's not picking out that it's a practice test or that this isn't really for a grade or something like that. So it's just stressing him out in this moment. And it kind of gives you a caption there. And in a lot of cases, these ENL students do have other students in their class who speak Spanish, if it is Spanish, so they can try and help translate a little bit. But it doesn't stop these students from falling behind. You notice here, like, the text on the page just seems to disappear. He can pick out a few parts, but it's still super difficult. And what you notice here is the math problem's talking about someone running 3 blocks, and this student's taking it literally as if it is like building blocks, not realizing that it's city blocks. So he is incredibly confused, as one would be. And of course this prompts him to ask a question, and then he gets laughed at when he's wrong. So that's kind of knocking his confidence a little bit. But this language barrier does not stop him from being good at math, and this is true in a lot of cases, where their math of an ENL student is usually still really, really high ability. So he gets the right answer. Of course, this other kid's like stealing it from him, but like, basically as you watch this, you just see he's trying to pull out his dictionary, find the word. He can find the word to say the answer, but he can't really find the words to communicate that. And the video goes on a little bit longer, but that's the basic concept here, is like, this is how this happens, this is how this looks. So then we kind of get into like the factors in like language acquisition. So the first thing that I think is really prominent with this is like discerning what your motivation is. So in her article, Foreign Language Education, Whose Definition, author and professor from Weber State University, June K. Phillips, reveals that much of the public still considers foreign language study as a subject for the elite and the college-bound, and a skill or talent the European or the citizens of developing nations prize, not one that is needed in the English-only United States. And this is a narrative that's common for a lot of people, is like, foreign language is not necessary unless you're high class, you're going to college, etc., etc. So this is a narrative that kind of invalidates world language in a lot of public schools that don't necessarily value cultural competence as much as others. So here are some like possible conflictions. So what's it going to look like if you're learning this for a class as opposed to like actually having a genuine interest? in the language and its culture, because culture, in my opinion, has to go hand in hand with the language to truly pick it up and immerse yourself in it. Another example, are you doing this for a job application or simply for a degree that looks good? Or are you doing this because you're like an ENL student, like we saw on the last slide, where you are forced to learn this language to be able to function in society? So the severity is different there. The motivation is going to look different. And that's just one way that the ENL acquisition or the language acquisition process can look really different for different people. And then another concept I really enjoy talking about, reading about, is how Joan Rubin presents, quote unquote, the good language learner. Basically, the skills that like the good language learner has is aptitude, which is having like perseverance if you're getting the wrong answers to like keep going, and also just having really good guessing, not being afraid to guess and not know. And then we have motivation. So this is like practicing skills on your own, enhancing your vocabulary when you have the opportunity, and also like putting in an extra effort to obtain cultural knowledge when you're learning a language. And then finally, opportunity. When you have the opportunity to say something, like attempt and see if you make a mistake, overcome the fear. Don't have like inhibitions towards things, but also like if you have the opportunity to talk to a native speaker, go for it. Take those experiences when you can get them, because that's inevitably, for Joan Rubin, but also for me, like this is what makes you the ideal good language learner. And there's a lot of truth to a lot of things she talks about in her article, and I highly recommend it. And then we have a big one, which is the age factor. The age factor, usually when thought of, you think about culture shock. The younger age groups don't necessarily go through culture shock as bad as someone who tries to do this later in life. Usually if you're starting an immersion program when a kid is 5 or 6 years old, the culture shock's not going to hit them as hard. Long sequences. Again, if you start really early, the kids have a much longer time to be immersed and work with the language. So the longevity is directly related to high proficiency and the cultural awareness from the get-go when they're young. Reduced fear. Kids at the age of 5 and 6 don't get embarrassed or fear judgment as much as kids in high school or middle school do. So this makes them less afraid to make those mistakes when they're trying to learn a language. And then also immersion. And when I talk about immersion, we're going to see more on the next couple slides, because this is primarily what I talked to the person I interviewed about. So I interviewed Vesna Dimitrescu. Her focuses are on expanding world language programs in K-12 education in Indiana, as well as internationalizing P through 16 education. Her interests and research are language teacher cognition and identity, reflective practices of teachers and educators, and instructional practices and professional development of language teachers in foreign and second language contexts. And then finally, dual language immersion programs, which is what we talked about a lot. So these are just some of her main thoughts that I pulled from our conversation. So she actually told me a lot about the comprehensible input hypothesis, which basically means that if you're giving a student a bunch of different types of input, they're more likely to be able to produce the output. So this is like using body language, facial expressions, attaching emotions to certain terms. Students are more likely to remember them, and that can even just be a basic teaching concept, but it works really well for ENL students. Scaffolding. Basically, what you can pull from this is like focus on what the students can learn instead of drawing attention to what they can't. And this is really, really important with ENL students because it can be really, really overwhelming. But also the other way around, it can be really overwhelming too, going from English to another language. So, age matters. Again, she 100% agreed with this. Without a doubt, immersion is so much more effective at a young age. Language 1 support. Supporting a student's first language as you teach the second is crucial because sometimes those students aren't completely concrete with their first language, so it's important to kind of support that one as you add to it, with the younger students especially. Atmosphere. And this goes both ways with ENL students and also students learning a language going from English. A warm and judgment-free classroom environment promotes language learning a lot more because students don't feel like they're going to get ridiculed or picked on or made fun of if they make mistakes, because you will make mistakes with foreign language if you're really trying and putting yourself out there with it. And basically the conclusion I got from my conversation with Vesna is that immersion is absolutely, in her eyes, 100% the most effective way to learn a non-native language. Especially at a young age, it can be really, really, really effective with a really high percentage of accuracy and proficiency. And then just to conclude, my reactions and thoughts, honestly, most of what I discovered is right on par with what I believed to be true. However, I did learn some things in terms of immersion. I learned a lot from Vesna about this. I was always kind of on the fence about total immersion just because I'd never experienced a lot of it. But the way she explained it has kind of shifted my thoughts about it. And then my continuing questions are just, when are we going to have more than just the Spanish English immersion programs in the United States? And also just when are we going to value world language as much as other countries? And what needs to be done to make world language a common standard that's like worth investing in as a country? So yeah.